I'm thrilled to be welcoming today Dr. Nandini Seth, a great data scientist and a brilliant professor at Masters Union. Nandini is a PhD from IIM Bangalore and has been instrumental in designing our undergrad program in data science and AI. Hi, Nandini. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Swati. How are you doing?
Very well. And I think you need no introduction. Everybody knows you. You are the favorite professor teaching data science without, like making it really hard. So I think
try.
students just love you.
I try.
You try. You're trying really exceptionally well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So today, we're going to talk about how is it that data science can make better decisions than even CEOs.
I'd not say that they make better decisions than CEOs. CEOs mostly rely on intuition, and sometimes that's important because there's years of experience that comes and that builds that intuition. An interesting thing, right? Sigmund Freud, when the idea of hypothesis testing, which is a statistical concept, came into being, somebody asked him, and this is an anecdote, right? Somebody asked him, what is a hypothesis? And his first response was, it's intuition, right? So typically, data science is, in a way, trying to validate the intuition that you have using data that is available, right? So even if, let's say, a CEO says, well, I'm sure that this product is going to sell. Maybe in the past, decision making was all about the ability to pay. Now, decision making is a lot to do with the willingness and the ability to pay. So there is a lot that goes into decision making. I used to work with a team that for a retailer in the US used to determine what kind of production they should do. So this client was Macy's, and what kind of clothes should Macy's carry the summer of the next year based on what are people liking on social media this year. Yes, today.
Okay.
Right? What are the kind of comments that they are making? Which patterns are appearing again and again? Now, a CEO may not be able to see that far ahead into the future because they're very good at looking at the big picture. This requires you to look at minute details. It's almost like sieving with the comb, right? To figure out what are these patterns that are emerging again and again. What is it that the customer is wanting, right? And that perhaps could be in line with the intuition or could be completely contrary to the intuition. But data science is giving you a way to validate whether what decision you're making for a customer is the right decision or is it not the right decision.
Fair. And probably the better way to say this is that data science helps the CEOs make better decisions because it's not just intuition, it's then it has evidence that's backed by data.
Absolutely. It's almost like having a crystal ball, right? But it's not magic, it's math.
It's math.
Right, yeah.
Oh, I like it. It's not magic, it's math.
Yes.
And it's science.
Yeah, it's both art and science. I think formulation of the right model, formulating the right assumptions, that's almost art, right? Then applying the math on it, that's the science. So it's a place where art and science actually come together in a way.
So give us more examples, right, where better decision making is being done by using data.
All right, awesome. So do you use any OTT platform?
Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix, for example. Reed Hastings was popular for using data, right, to make decisions. There are shows on Netflix where starting from who will be the first actor in the pilot to what should the music sound like to what should be the color palette of the show to whether it appears on your home screen or not, all of these decisions are actually data driven. These are called micro segmentations, right? So you would have heard of segmentation in marketing.
Yeah.
Now, basis our online behavior, customers or users of Netflix are segmented into micro segments where, let's say, Swati, for example, could be somebody who loves to watch shows that have a female dominant lead character. So then Swati will get recommendations of movies and shows that have a female dominant character because that increases her likelihood of watching that show. Similarly, shows are being created. Orange is the New Black was one example. House of Cards was another example, where everything in the pilot, from the color palette to the music to the director to the actors, were chosen on the basis of data. Little known fact.
Yeah, the little known fact. I couldn't have imagined that House of Cards was not art, but really science in
Well,
terms
yeah.
of, like who's going to do what.
Yeah.
And I binge watched it during my college days.
Same.
We both are very similar now.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this was more on the OTT side, but if I were to, and this was more on the customer preference side, which we all know data is being used.
Right.
But can you give us more examples which are probably not very consumer facing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so interesting that you would bring this up, because I was discussing the very same with somebody yesterday, where we were trying to understand how, for his particular organization, what kind of mechanisms can be put in place if we can leverage data in order to determine the productivity for the employees there, or even to understand whether the employees are happy or not.
How do you do
In
that?
order to do that, you would be able to look at things not just from a perspective of qualitative questions that you're asking them, but maybe checking how long they are logged in, right? What are the kind of meetings that they are doing? How long are the meetings lasting? We can even, for example, use the transcript of some of those meetings, because we now have note takers. So we can do a sentiment analysis on the transcript to figure out the tonality of the meetings. This can help determine whether the employees or within the team, they're happy or not. So in a way, it's an indirect way of doing a pulse check on whether my team is happy or not.
So you don't need to do surveys anymore.
You can do them to sort of validate your solution, as I said, to build intuition, but data can give you a really, really good understanding of whether your employee or whether your team is happy or not.
Wow. Sometimes, like these advances and knowing what data can lead to opens up a lot of fascinating, I would say, ways in which we can live our lives.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask you this question that, Nandini, 10 years later, how is data science going to change the way we live our lives? Like, what are the 1-2 big routine changes that you would see, hey, with the data, this will be solved?
I'd say both data and AI here. I'd
Yeah.
want to bring that up because, about 10-15 years ago, we used to say data is the new oil. And we have seen how...
Can you also then break down data science and AI for our audience?
Of course,
Like
of
what
course.
is data science? What's AI? Who's the subset?
Yeah.
All of that. Break down the jargon.
Let me give you one example. So everybody has heard that data is the new oil,
yeah.
right? That was said about 15 years ago. There was a statement that was given by Clive Humby, who happened to be my first boss, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. Clive Humby said that statement long ago. And you can think of data being an oil, and you can think of AI being electricity that is generated because of that fuel, right? Think of AI as electricity, just the way electricity transformed lives globally for how human beings evolved. That's the same thing that AI is going to do. It will become a part and parcel of not just our everyday routine. It's almost like an external hardware that we are now using. Our brain knows that we have this aid that we can go to. So a lot of our conversations are now reliant on the information that we can borrow from, for example, large language models. But AI is not new, right? Artificial intelligence in general is not at all new. Neither is machine learning, very honestly. Neither is data science. They've existed for a really long time. To give you an example, one of the most popular ML algorithms, Random Forest, was first written in 1996, right? But it started getting used about a decade ago. Why? Because earlier, while we did have the mathematical understanding of the algorithm, we did not have the computational power to execute that algorithm. With the advancements in technology, now we have a lot of computational power. We can do a lot of analysis in real time. We have almost an infinite storage capacity. We have the ability to collect data and assimilate data, right? That's what we see as AI today. It's just models that have been existing, right? And they are now able to use a lot of data that we have been generating, whether it is user-generated data, whether that is data that is generated by machineries, whether it is data that is generated in the environment, but we are able to utilize that in order to make decisions. So if I was to say AI is the broader, big sort of circle, and within that circle we have machine learning algorithms. Within machine learning algorithms, we have reinforcement learning algorithms or natural language processing models, or these models which become then a smaller subset of both the machine learning algorithms, which are a larger subset of the AI algorithms.
And then AI is a subset of.
AI is largely, I would say it's an overlap. Like if you'd say, I'd say it's the intersection of mathematics, right, or
And-
computational capabilities in general, where I'll include math, stats, calculus, optimization
that.
theory, all of that, and computer science on the other side. So if the intersection of that, you will find AI, and within AI, you will find all of these things.
So then I'm going to ask a question that I get a lot is that for somebody to be familiar with AI, ML, and all of this, like, is mathematical knowledge really the key? Because when you think of math, you think of like calculus, complicated equations, and a lot of people just want to stay away.
Right. So again, I'll explain this with an example, right? I have a 2-year-old, you know that. She can talk in English, right? But can she write in English?
No.
No, right? Because she doesn't know how to form alphabets. She doesn't know about semantics. She doesn't know the sound, right? She can replicate what I'm saying. However, she cannot formulate her own thing right now because she doesn't have an understanding, right? So it's the same way. Not that we can't leverage all of these AI and ML algorithms to make decisions. Yes, you can. Only to the extent that they are replicating something that exists. For that, you perhaps maybe don't need as advanced an understanding of mathematics and statistics as you would if you were to create newer algorithms, if you were to understand newer use cases of these algorithms, if you have a very context specific decision that you need to make, which may require you to tweak your algorithm. For that, you definitely need to have an understanding of the optimization theory and the statistics that goes behind the algorithm.
Fair enough. So you're saying, and you know, the other conversations I've had, people have told me that not every individual working in AI needs to recreate tools like ChatGPT and a lot of large language models that exist. So the ability that you need is probably how to leverage these for your own specific use cases. And probably you're saying that in those things, you don't really need to understand everything from scratch and know the mathematical background.
Yeah, I mean, let's consider this as a 2x2, right? If I was to place on one of my x's how critical the decision is, you know, it could be life-threatening, it could be very cost-intensive, it could require a lot more resources, it could be very time-consuming. And on the other end of the spectrum, I may have decision that's not very critical. It could be a general decision that I make regularly. And on another axis, let me say the task, which is for this decision. This could be a repetitive task, or it could be a task that is an exclusive, high creation, you know, creative value, very individualistic task. Now, on this 2x2, you have to consider these 4 quadrants. All 4 of them have jobs in them, and all 4 of them can leverage AI in some form or the other. The amount of understanding that you need will depend on which quadrant your job is. For example, a criticality low and repetitive task, you can easily give it up to AI. You know, you can easily ask AI to do this job. But a high criticality but repetitive task will require human intervention time and again, right?
Because you can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong. The cost is too high. So you need to have an individual here who has a fairly good understanding of how the algorithm is working, but does not need to interfere with the algorithm that much. So it is possible here that the person is low on the math and stat understanding, high on the implementation understanding, and that person will work well. However, if you move on the other 2 quadrants, let's say I have a low criticality but highly individualistic task, you need to learn how to leverage these existing tools. For example, I need to come up with ideas for, let's say, this podcast, right? You need to have somebody who would think about them. There is creativity in the task, However, the criticality of the task might be low because we are allowed to, think more about it. We can put our heads to it, etc. Now, in here, I could have leveraged a large language model. I could have done iterations on that to come up with the first draft and use that draft to move ahead, right? Again, it's a person that may not require any knowledge of AI at all or how the algorithm is working, just requires a knowledge of what are the right prompts that I should give so that my output is great, right? So what is the input that I should give it? That's a different kind of skill set with AI that you require. And now come to the fourth quadrant, which is my quadrant where I need to have high criticality, high costs, and then I also need to have high levels of creativity. To me, at this stage, we are still working on AI models that can help with this, right? I mean, doctors are performing surgeries where AI is aiding them understand. We have already used AI to do better diagnostics, etc. Right. However, we can't take away the human intervention here, right? So where do you lie? Now, in the fourth quadrant, the final one that we spoke, it requires somebody to have a very, very good understanding of the math, of the stat, of everything that goes in the algorithm to be able to create this algorithm that is of use. Otherwise, you can go wrong, and the cost of that is going to be very,
too
very
high, right?
Too
like,
high.
And I know that people are trying to leverage AI for health tech, diagnosing, and also probably diagnosing it much earlier before the symptoms appear, right? So
Absolutely.
it's a great value add.
Absolutely, right?
But then obviously you need a doctor to be able to look at it. You can't just go with what AI is saying, at least as of today.
As of today, right? I mean, see, 10 years ago, a self-driven car, the best you could do was put a brake on the accelerator and that was your self-driven car. Because while the idea was there, the implementation was not there. Now, as we all know, there are self-driven cars that are doing a great job. So who knows, 10 years from now, yes, the AI replicated model for...
You walk into a hospital and there's an AI doctor treating you.
For example, you walk into the hospital, I had to stand in a queue for 40 minutes just to register myself and, that can be done by AI, right? And I think those tasks can still be done by AI, or at least AI can be leveraged to do that better. And I think we have to think of a systems perspective here, right? Every decision, whether it is on the customer side, whether it is on the organizational level side, whether it's on the supply side, whatever decision you consider, it's always going to be a collection of some small decisions. Which of these decisions can AI make better or quicker or cheaper than
then
us?
We go to AI.
Exactly. So then think of it as a system where, AI can be a part of the system, but not necessarily the entire solution, and that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Fair. Now, you have been teaching Masters Union students for a long time. You were the first faculty of Masters Union and a founding member. And I've always heard from the students that the way you teach, it doesn't feel like hardcore math. It feels like the real world. So tell us more about how you teach data science to the students and how you make it really practical.
Yeah, so I think I think one of the genuine reasons why Masters Union has my heart was this idea that we don't need to teach things the way they have been taught to us all this while, right? We both went to grade schools before this, and we both know how math was taught to us. It's not something that excites you, right? And that's terrible, because that leads us to believe that we're not good at it, because we are not excited about it, because we perhaps fail some papers, and that's what creates either a fear towards maths or mathematical subjects, or a dislike at least, right? And that's what I've seen with a lot of kids. But then when I ask them, do you play poker? They say yes. Are they good at it? Yes, they're very good at it, right? And then I ask them, how did you do this? And they tell me examples of how they were able to understand that their chances of winning are slightly higher because of the way somebody else is playing. What is that if not statistics? What is that if not probability theory, right? So that's the kind of ideas that I try to bring to the classroom. For example, I don't teach them probability through, let's say, just solving problems. We play like a 3-card brag in the class, which is Teen Patti, and try to understand how probabilities would work in a Teen Patti scenario, right? A little known fact, some of us with the students developed like a Python program this time around, which would tell you a probability of you winning in Teen Patti during Diwali season.
Oh, wow.
And some of us made some money with that. So I think I think the moment you try to introduce things that the students can relate to, and you try to take away this idea of making things unnecessarily difficult for them to absorb, then they start finding it very, very interesting. Then they also want to learn the harder things, right? And I think that has what has helped me in restructuring my courses, making them super hands-on, making them super practical, making them realize that they've actually been using law of large numbers and hypothesis testing all along. They just did not know what they were doing, because that's, I do believe that statistics or quantitative techniques is genuinely how our brain functions. It's how we make decisions rationally. We just don't know what to call them or how to go about doing them as a process. And that's what I try to teach using examples in the classroom.
No, fair. And I know one of your examples where the students built a predictive model to find out the price of a startup that was getting listed.
Yeah.
Right? So now, if somebody has to do that, that is a very exciting problem
Yeah.
statement,
Yeah.
right? And if that needs a lot of algorithms to be applied, then students would learn those algorithms,
Yeah.
because that's a very tangible output
Right.
that you're getting to,
Yes.
right? And all along, we have never gone for the tangible outputs during the
Yeah.
school years. at least.
Absolutely. And you know, it's very interesting. Like, for the same example that you're giving, I never give, for example, macroeconomic indicators to the student as a data. They come up with it themselves. They are able to think through this perspective that, okay, an IPO is going to be listed. At the time that it is being listed, what is the market condition like? What is the, you know, for example, the political setup of the country at that point in time?
Yeah.
How is the market behaving in context to that particular space, right? And these are things that I never tell them. They are able to figure this out. They even dig out sources for data because it's just very interesting to them. It's almost like playing a game, right? When you used to play Mario as a child, no matter how many times you fall in the ditch, you would still start again and still running in circles so that you can reach Princess Peach, because that's what you do. That's just, it's a low sort of risk environment which lets you fail, but every failure teaches you something, right? So even if students in my classroom create models, I always tell them that even though this is a statistics class, there is no one right answer. So now solve this. How
Yeah.
would you solve this? How would you problem solve, really, knowing that these are some concepts to keep in mind? And they come up with some wonderful solutions, right? Even if that solution is not the exact solution I was hoping for, it's almost like a mental gym for them. That's what I tell them, that this is a muscle that you need to hone. Being data first in your decision making, backing your intuition with data is a muscle that you develop on over time. And so we use the classroom just to develop that muscle.
And that's what is used in the business going forward,
Yeah.
right? So while we groom them to become business leaders, tech startup leaders, and now with our data science and AI course, tech leaders as well.
Yeah.
But yes, intuition is necessary, but with that comes the muscle to back it up
Yeah.
with real data. Because
Absolutely.
sometimes intuition can get
Yeah, no,
wrong.
but I think CDOs are gonna eat like CEOs for breakfast in some time. And I think if you get data,
Yeah.
it's just going to be the norm.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
We've already seen how even a single ad that is pitched to us, even the clothes that we are wearing, to what we will eat, to the Starbucks coffee that I'm going to get, to the metro that I'm going to take, or the cab that I'm going to take, everything is so data driven at this stage. I don't think there is a future where data and AI will not sort of be a part of every singular decision that we make.
No, I completely agree with you. And thank you, Nandini, for taking out time today to enlighten us about all the real and cool applications of data science. And I'm super excited for our students who are going to come in the data and AI course that we are launching recently to take your class and learn how to predict stock prices
Yeah.
with the data that they have.
Very, very excited to have them in my classroom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swati.